Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Jackalone. I have a question for everybody. How much of our nonverbal cues are innate? Well, our guest, Dr. Abbie Morano, will be able to explain that to us. Dr. Morano, or Dr. Abbie, we're going to call her from now on, is an internationally recognized expert and practitioner and scientist in the field of human behavior. She's acknowledged by the U.S. Department of State as being a top 1% expert in her field. She has delivered specialized training to the FBI, the U.S. Secret Service, Homeland Security, and law enforcement officers across the country. She's written a couple of books, including children's books, but her latest, The Upper Hand, Mastering Persuasion and Getting What You Want with the Science of Social Engineering. Now, she's also delivered a TED Talk on human behavior. Dr. Abbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're excited about this because this is a unique topic that we get, and rarely do we get a chance to speak to not only the scientist but the practitioner. Because one thing that I've learned in my career in law enforcement is there's always this battle, right, between academics and practitioners, right? Did you,
Yeah.
when you're doing this, I listen. Cops are the hardest students to teach. Have you discovered that?
See, I love teaching federal agents, mostly because they feel almost like they're British. The British culture is very dry and blunt and not really offended by anything. So when I'm teaching the feds, they're very much the same. So it's almost like I'm home.
Okay, very good. So once again, part of human behavior, right? So that's part of your thing about
Yeah.
learning all these things. I want to talk about your first book because I think it's a good segue into where we are presently in regards to the research and
Yeah.
this and the science behind all of this, right? So your first book, A Work in Progress, it was written, through you going through your trials and tribulations in life, and you come out with this. Um, how much of that book was to learn about the human behavior from yourself first, and then how does that translate into the public?
Yeah, so I really wrote the book because I had found that I was purposefully subduing my career because I was afraid of people finding out who I was and being discovered because I'd made some mistakes in my past. And I didn't know why I'd made them. And I just felt so much shame. And I was looking at other sources like TED Talks and popular science books, and none of them really had the answers. And although a lot of the books were really well meaning, they weren't based on the science of how human beings actually function. So I turned to the literature to help me understand how to stop doing the things that I was doing, how to learn from them, how to be better, how to grow, how to deal with shame. And I realized there was such a huge gap in the market for that. And I didn't want other people in the same position that I was, where you're purposefully self sabotaging your success because of your past, because we really can't change the past. All we can do is grow from it. So, in order to do that, we have to understand our own behavior. And because there is so much, for lack of a better word, rubbish out there on human behavior and these books, it's really difficult for people to know actually what to believe. So I really wanted to have that source for people where it was very science based, but communicated in a way that they could digest. So to answer the question directly, it is so essential that we first understand ourselves before we understand each other. Because if we think about good communication, good leadership, good influence, anything really to do with other people, if we can't first control our own emotional reactions, then everything else really is futile because we might understand, okay, I need to do these things to influence someone else. But if we're triggered constantly and we don't understand how to control ourselves in those situations, all of our logic kind of goes out the window. So first we need to understand ourselves before we can understand each other.
It's interesting, and the biggest takeaway that I got was the difference, or the difference between shame and guilt. And I try to
Yeah.
see how that translates for like law enforcement. If you have to go into an interrogation room and you have somebody who has done something terrible, right? How does that work? What is the difference actually between shame and guilt?
Well, shame is really about the self. So when we feel shame, it means that we've done something that contradicts who we believe ourselves to be or who we want to be. And we feel this negative self evaluation because of that. And it's both behavioral and self. So I feel bad about my behavior, but I also feel bad about who I am. So say you're in a relationship and you cheat on your partner and you don't see yourself as someone who would do that, but you did that. Whereas guilt is about behavior. It's not necessarily about the self. You don't feel that self-criticism in the same way. Because if we take that same example of maybe you broke up with your partner, you might feel guilt that you hurt them, but you know it was the best thing for you. And you're actually respecting your own boundaries. So you feel that guilt, but you don't feel that negative self-evaluation. So really that's the different. One is kind of that sense of worthiness of the self, and one is very behavioral directed, and the guilt is very behavioral.
The link for the book right there, the upper hand is right there. Nightbot sharing that every couple of minutes, as well as Dr. Abbie's uh, official website. Let's get into the upper hand book, because there's a couple of things that translates for law enforcement for sure. But this was, from what I read, this was actually pushed by the Secret Service in order to get this down on paper. The book, the U.S.
Sorry,
Secret Service.
yes, it cut out for a second.
Oh, okay. Yep. I'll ask the question again. The U.S. Secret Service actually encouraged you to write this book.
So I had written the book and I had spent about 7 years working on this. And I hadn't released the book, but I did one talk on it. And the Secret Service heard about my framework and then had reached out to me to come and teach it to them.
It's actually kind of interesting, kind of thing. So describe to us what that framework is.
Yep. So a lot of these books on influence, they talk about how to get what you want. And it's you do X and then you get Y. And that's really how they finish. Do this, get this. But the problem is human behavior doesn't really work that way. Where if you do something in every single scenario, you always get the same result because people are very complicated. And most of the time, when you say, well, why does this technique work? They can't explain it to you at a deeper level. So, what I wanted to do was not say, do X, get Y. What I wanted to say is, here's how people function. Here's the foundation of how people make decisions. So, once you understand that, let's work together to create some tools from that. And now you can take that deeper level understanding. So, the framework is looking at the universal aspects of human decision making, because very, very complicated. But if we think about plants, right, you have thousands and thousands of different types of plants. But at the core, they all need the same basic things: water, sunlight, soil. And then from that, we have this vast array of different types of plants. Well, human beings are very much the same in that if you look at our biology, we are 99.9% genetically identical. So within that biology are commonalities that can be understood and exploited for influence. So what I wanted to take was that. That doesn't mean that 0.1% is irrelevant. It's extremely important. But there are foundational understandings that we can use. So in terms of a basic explanation of those understandings, first is that we are all designed to survive by any means necessary. That is the most foundational aspect of what it means to be human. That if something threatens our survival, that's always going to be top priority. So it's the drive to survive. And then we are driven as a social species. So we have this desire to connect and cooperate. And that's principle number 2. And then principle number 3 is that we are our brains. So if you take a limb, I'm still me. If you take an organ, I'm still me. But if you remove any aspect of the brain, who I am can fundamentally change because we are our brains. So if we understand a basic understanding of how the brain works, we can use that for influence. Principle number 4 is the mind-body feedback loop, that we are interconnected. So our thoughts, feelings, and physical states are connected. If you influence someone's physical state, like the environment, sight, sound, smells, it influences the internal state, mood, emotions. And then the reverse is true. And then the final principle is that 0.1%, the self-identity. It's the way that we perceive ourselves to be, the characteristics that we define ourselves by. And that's the uniqueness. So if you understand what's important to a person, who that person is, what their belief systems are, things like that, you can have a better understanding of how to influence them. So that's
Right.
kind of a overview of those principles, that when we understand these 5 things together, we can use them to influence people more effectively.
Well, out of those five key truths, right? I think you referred to them as the one I focused in on was the we want to connect and cooperate. I figured from the law enforcement perspective, that is the biggest tenet that they need to take away from your book for sure.
Yeah, I think so. The drive to survive and connect to cooperate, they kind of work interchangeably, because the drive to survive, if you think about the typical law enforcement interview you see on TV, it's someone, leaning over a desk, slamming their hands on the table, shouting, being aggressive. And these really aggressive approaches, they counteract or they contradict that drive to survive. So soon as someone feels threatened, all we want to do is remove ourselves from that threat. So you place yourself as that threat if you're aggressive, which is why we need to use tactics to create cooperation, which brings us to principle number 2, which is that drive to connect and cooperate, because we are a species that it's in our nature to want to cooperate. And if we look at the brain, when we're cooperating with people, naturally the reward pathway is activated. So we have a reward network in the brain, which is a deep network from the striatum for neuroscience junkies, which is a deep, deep part of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex, meaning it has evolved with us. It's been with us for hundreds of thousands of years. So when we're cooperating with someone, that network is activated, meaning it feels rewarding. But if we see someone act unjust, that network is activated when we think about punishing them. So if you are a law enforcement officer, if the other person feels that you are being unfair or unjust, not only do they not want to cooperate with you, they are very resistant, and actually they feel a sense of reward when they don't cooperate with you, which is why it's so important that instead of thinking about how can I get this person to give me information, or how can I get this person to trust me, we actually need to flip it, because it's in their nature to be trusting. We've just learned to be skeptical. So we put the dependence on us of, actually it's, how can I make them want to cooperate? How can I show I'm trustworthy? So how can I show I'm a safe place to be cooperative with? And when we think about it like that, the approaches we take to interviewing are very different, because it's about building trust and showing that we want to be fair, and not trying to show them that they have no power.
Right. And when for law enforcement, it's like a different kind of thing, right? There's a difference between an interview and then there's a difference between an interrogation, right? They're
Yes.
totally two different things. Does that play a different role in this kind of thing? Like, the one kind of requesting the information and the other one kind of demanding the information.
Yeah, I mean, even in an interrogation, it should feel like a conversation. There should never be a point, even if it is in a room that is, that feels very threatening, you can still do certain things with your body language, how you set up the room to make them feel more comfortable. And I say that the way you interact with someone sat on their sofa, having a conversation with them, should be the same way you interact with them in an interrogation, in terms of the communication style. And just going back to things like, I'll give an example of the environment. There are very simple things you can do, because if we think about that principle of survival by any means necessary, one of the things that makes us feel that we're being threatened is when we have no control over the situation. So officers want to give people a perceived sense of control as much as they can, so it doesn't threaten that survival drive, because that's going to put them in defensive mode. So really simple things like where they're sat in the room. What we often do is sit ourselves as the officer on the side next to the door, and they're on the other side. So the door's over there and it's kind of guarded by the officer. Simply put them on that side of the room, put them close to the door. They're not going to get up and leave. There's going to be someone outside the door waiting for them anyway if they could. But what it does for the brain is, when the brain is scanning the room for senses of safety or threat, if they're sat closer to the door, it's a perceived sense of safety. So there's little things like that that you can do that do give them this slight sense of safety, even if you have a very limited space.
That's interesting because we were told a lot of times make sure they can't see the door because
Yeah.
when they see the door, they want to like, all right, that's my exit, that's my chance to get out of here.
Yep. And one of the reasons that this is taught is because the original understandings of influence and interrogations was actually all about show you have the most power, right? You want to be the authority in the room, and you still want to be the authority in the room. But originally, the tactics were very aggressive. They were about showing the other person has no power and you have the power. And we used to believe that that's the way that you get information. And actually, we know that that isn't the case now. People are more willing to give you information when they don't feel that you are threatening to them. So you want to give the other person a sense of safety as much as possible. And I remember speaking to my friend Joe Navarro about this, and he wrote the book, What Everybody is Saying. And he was in the FBI for 25 years. And he said that he still has people that he put into prison and they've done their time and come out that text him and ask for his advice because he was never a threat to them. Even though he was the officer that got them behind bars, they perceived him to be fair and trustworthy. And the way that he interviewed was about building connection and cooperation. And it's a really clear example of even if you're doing the right thing, even if you have a suspect on the other side, you can still use these approaches that are cooperative and about building trust and trustworthiness.
How do you how do you build that trustworthiness when you have virtually little time, right? Because they make an arrest, they put them in what we refer to as the box, and you're getting all your paperwork together, and you want to get in there. We don't want this person to spend too much time thinking about this stuff. So how do we build that trust so quickly?
Well, there's two sides of trust. One is the perception of, and then one is the being. So it's kind of the two sides of the coin, right? You need to be perceived as trustworthy and you need to be trustworthy. And in order to be trustworthy, that takes time. So the more time you can interview, the better. So if you can make these conversations hours long or come back a second time rather than just trying to get that quick confession, that is the first thing. We think we really need to get it. Like you have 10 minutes to do it. And actually, when you go with that mindset of, I need to get this now, that's the worst mindset to go in with. The best mindset in is, I'm not here to get a confession. I'm here to get accurate information. That's it. You change the mindset of, I'm not getting a confession. I'm just here to get accurate information. And the first thing I would do is completely state that. You want to show your intentions are, we're on the same team. So we naturally, and this is the connect and cooperate principle also, not only are we social species, we're a group social species, meaning we have in-group, out-group. These people are my people, those people are not my people. It's one of the most supported phenomena in psychology that we group people as like us and against us. And naturally, when you go into an interrogation, it's you versus them. They're naturally the opposition. So, what you want to do is try and bring yourself onto their team, that we have an aligned mission here of, look, this has happened. This is a situation. I'm not here to get anything from you. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to listen to you. I don't have an agenda other than I want to know the truth of the situation. I want to see your point of view. So you work with them and you're not aggressive in your tactic, or you don't do the I know you're lying. As soon as you say that, if someone has if you say to someone, I know you're lying, or I know this is what you've done, in their head, if they don't see themselves as lying, say they see themselves as protecting someone, often they'll double down on the lie. So you want to avoid kind of those kind of statements and show them you're working with them to see their point of view. And when you frame it like that, when you're going with that mindset, it helps to move the conversation more towards a conversation than an interrogation.
Are there any specific words that can actually make that transition, or is there something just, is there something that, we can glean from that?
Yeah, the first thing I always say is you want to give people that perceived sense of control. So obviously you have an agenda, right? You want to know the answer to this. But when we feel that we are trapped and we have no options other than someone has said, do this, that makes us feel like we're really boxed in. So you want to give people multiple options, but the options are all really leading in the same place. So you give them this perceived sense of control by saying, instead of something like, okay, tell me what happened here, you say, would you prefer to talk about what we already know, or would you prefer to start from the beginning? So now for them, they feel like they're kind of taking the wheel of, okay, I have options where I want to take this. It doesn't really matter what either route they go, you're still getting the same thing that you want. But there's little things like that where it's giving them this full sense of control. And that's what I always start with. And firstly, if you can get someone to talk about things that they're passionate about and things that they like, people tend to light up. So if you focus first on, okay, I want to get to know this person, because also information is power. So if you understand a little bit about their history, a little bit about their family life, you can understand what's important to them. What kind of hobbies do they have? So that helps you bring yourself into their in group also. So spend a little bit of time first understanding the person. Say, okay, this is why we're here. This is how it's going to go. But talk about, let's talk about how you got here. Tell me a little bit about this. Where did you come from? You get to know them a little bit. You spend some time building rapport, and then naturally going to increase a little bit of liking towards you, because when someone shows us interest about ourselves, naturally it increases sense of liking towards them. So always start with that rapport building in mind, and then as much as you can, give them a perceived sense of control.
Right. Yeah, I was going to mention this sounds a lot like rapport building, right? So looking
It
for
is.
that, looking for
That
that common ground, that kind of thing, get the
it
person in the
is.
conversation, right? I mean,
Exactly.
well,
And
how do
that
you?
common
Oh,
ground,
sorry.
sorry.
No, no,
That
go
that
ahead.
common ground is bringing yourself into that in group. So it's, again, it's not you versus me, it's us together trying to solve a problem.
How do you? I don't know if the word fight is the right word, but how do you that fight flight mentality that this person has, right? They know they're in trouble. Like
Yeah.
how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so when we build oxytocin helps to reduce the flight instinct. So when we're in fight or flight mode, we have cortisol running through the brain, we have adrenaline being pumped up, we have all these emotions, and the nervous system really is in overdrive. And often, well, that's going to be the state that they enter the situation in. So often when we put the pressing questions in first, they're still in fight or flight mode. Their nervous system isn't regulated. And then what we do have is there's this thing called excitation transfer. So when we feel these emotions in us, often they get transferred over to other things. So if we have just had an argument before an interaction and then someone asks us a question, we might be more irritable with that person because we move that feeling of anxiety and irritability from the actual source to that new person. And what happens if we start asking these pressing questions too early in an interview is that sense of discomfort in the body and in the nervous system gets moved from the environment of being in an interview to this person, the interviewer, is causing these negative feelings. So we want to give people's nervous system a time to simmer down. So saying to people like there's no need to be nervous, there's no need to be anxious, might be, again, well-meaning, but it doesn't really help. It's like when you're angry and someone says there's no need to be angry. Does it make you less angry? Usually makes you more angry. Or if someone says there's no need to be upset,
Don't tell your
it
wife to
doesn't,
calm down, right?
exactly. It doesn't make them calmer. And we might do this well-meaning of we're trying to show it's okay to be nervous, but actually what we should say is, I understand you're probably really nervous in this situation. This is a very difficult situation. I know it's not a normal situation that you're in. So let's, this is just a conversation between me and you. And this is the time to explain to them how this works. Because think about the anxiety in their head. It's what's going to happen to me? How long is this going to take? Will I have anything to eat or drink? If they haven't been to the bathroom, these things we don't often think about, but that makes discomfort in the body, which can also be transferred over. So you say, I know that this is going to cause anxiety. I know this is a difficult situation. Have you had anything to eat? Would you like a snack? Have you had anything to drink? Would you like some water? Would you like to go to the bathroom? Those basic physiological needs, deal with those first. So all of that isn't causing discomfort first. Once those are dealt with, okay, so this is how this is going to work. You explain how this works. It's just a conversation between me and you. I'm not here to get anything particular out of you other than your side of the story. That's it. I'm just here to get your side of the story. And then you start with that rapport building too. Because if you go in with those pressing questions while the nervous system is still ramped up, again, they're in survival mode, meaning everything now is a threat. You want to bring them out of it. And naturally, as they start to talk about things about themselves, as they start, you can even, if they're not wanting to talk about themselves, you can even talk about very basic things of the weather or the environment or anything else. Just get them talking about something natural before you start moving into those pressing questions.
Right. That's, it's excellent advice. I mean, something that we've told detectives this a lot. Sometimes it registers and
Yeah,
sometimes it
but you
doesn't.
you have in your head this particular mission. So you think, okay, I need to ask this, need to ask this, need to ask this. And I've seen it a lot where before an interview, they're saying to themselves, okay, this is the agenda, this is the agenda, this is what I need to get. And they go in. And when you're going in with that mission of, I need to get this from them, they feel it because you have this mission and you're kind of on like a fast speed. It's like someone's pressed speed up because you just want to get it over with because you're anxious too. And I have found that when you say to agents before you do an interview, you work on your breathing techniques because when the interviewee feels that you are nervous, it makes them nervous because we have emotional contagion. So even if we don't realize that we're taking on other people's emotions, we do. And often, too, we mimic other people's behaviors. So if the interviewer is coming in and they're defensive and they're nervous and they're showing these behaviors, it's going to transfer over to the interviewee. So that's the first thing you need to take care of. Make sure you're entering in a state of it's just a conversation. I don't have this very specific agenda in mind. You work on your breathing and you work on not only observing their nonverbals, but remembering that I might be seeing defensiveness in them because am I showing defensiveness and they're naturally mimicking that.
Is this something like where we should be telling detectives, like, smile when you're walking into the room and that kind of stuff?
It's funny you say that because I mentioned that oxytocin is naturally this kind of precursor to calming down the nervous system. When we see a genuine smile, oxytocin is released in the brain. And what that does is activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which works to counteract the synthetic nervous system, which is the one that is activated in fight or flight. So it naturally calms down the body. It's the same as when people are doing these self-touch displays, say they're grabbing their hand or touching their face. That also activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is why people often grab at their hands and grab at their fingers when they're nervous because they're trying to calm down the body with these self-soothers. So when you have a genuine smile when you greet someone, oxytocin is released. So that's the first thing they should see. Even though it's a very serious situation, you still want to show that you are friendly. You still want to show warmth of character. Now, you don't want to be smiling during the stages where you're being accusatory because
Right.
that has a reverse effect. But the very first thing they should see from an officer is a smile. And that goes against often what officers think they should show because they think, okay, I need to be tough and stern, show this is serious. You can show that it's a serious situation, but be a friendly face in a serious situation. Because remember, the goal is you and me, we're just trying to discover the truth together. It's not me against you. I'm not here to do anything bad for you. I'm here on your side. We just want to get to the truth together, whatever that is.
Right. And sometimes it's easier said than done, right? But I mean,
It is.
these are all good ideas and tips. How about handshaking?
Yeah, so COVID made that questionable with everyone now. Do we touch? Do we not? But
Fist bump.
touch, yeah, fist bump, and the elbow bump and all sorts of stuff. But when we experience consensual and appropriate touch, oxytocin is also released. We are a tactile species. That's why in locker rooms of sports, everybody's slapping each other on the shoulder, on the butt, or whatever. I don't suggest doing that, but it's
Yeah,
a
no, neither
natural
do I.
thing. No, I would suggest not. But it's a natural thing you see in these group behaviors. And when we enter any kind of interview, you should always enter with a smile and a handshake, because those are the things you want. And even if you're a boss or a CEO, touching someone on the shoulder when you say good job is more effective than just saying good job. So a handshake, and also it shows mutual respect, because if you're giving them a sense of perceived control, you want to quiet that fight or flight response. What you don't want to do is show you're here and I'm up here and I'm better than you. You want to be on the same level. So you show them respect. When they come in, you shake their hand, you smile, you introduce yourself. That's a sign of respect. So that's showing warmth of character. So those things that we think, oh, I can't do these because I need to show I'm the power here, actually doing those really simple things, treating someone like a human being, not like a suspect, makes them feel more warmth towards you and they're more cooperative.
Who would have thought that telling somebody we're going to bury you under the prison when we're done with all this, wouldn't be effective?
Who would have thought?
I see some of these TV shows and I kind of like, lose my mind. But, I've seen some things where you say to yourself, is this really the best kind of, atmosphere? I always said if cops were waiters and waitresses, we'd all starve to death. That's the only money that we could make because sometimes we do not know how to talk to people.
Yep. And one common thing I see is ultimatums. If you don't do this, you'll get this. And you see this in couples too. I don't think there's ever been a husband that's given an ultimatum to his wife and it's worked out positively
Yeah,
because ultimatums are just threats disguised as choices. So if you threaten someone, fight or flight instinct will automatically activate. An ultimatum, it might feel to you like you're giving them a choice. To them it will always feel like a threat. It is just a threat disguised as a choice. So ultimatum should not be in your vocabulary as an interviewer.
very good. Is there an example about an ultimatum that the detectives or something shouldn't use?
Yeah, a lot of the time they say, if you don't tell me now, there's nothing I can do for you. If you don't tell me now, if you don't sit and tell me this now, you are going to go to prison or you are going to get this. So it traps them. It puts them in this little box. And that's the last thing that you want to do. It's like, look, and one other thing is we often try and avoid reminding people they can say no. We want to trap them in this, you have to answer me. That's what ultimatums are. They're a trap to, you have to give me information or else. So we don't want to recognize that they have the power to say no. But again, if we want to counteract that threat response, we want to make them feel like we know they can say no and they can say no and they choose to say yes. Because remember, the goal isn't to force them to cooperate, it's to make them want to cooperate. So when we actually recognize and the fact that they don't have to tell us, we avoid doing it because they're like, oh, now they're going to tell me. They know they don't have to tell you. It's the same with after you read them the Miranda rights and say, they know they can get a lawyer. They know they don't have to talk to you. But by saying, look, I know you don't have to give us information, but I would like to help you. I would like to give you a fair outcome. That's all we want. We just want the truth, and we want a fair outcome for everyone involved. So I know you don't have to speak to us, but if you let me, I would really like to help you here. Would you allow me to do that? Would you allow me to help you? And doing that, if you say that to me, I'm much more likely to say, yes, okay, I'll have a conversation. Then you have to speak to me. No, I want my lawyer. So again, when you show them that they have some power in this situation and they're not completely powerless, they're going to be more willing to speak to you.
Sinead's got a good question here. So, the good cop, bad cop is out the window.
So I love this technique, um, as a great example of what not to do.
Okay, I was going to say,
Because
wow, really?
yes, I love it as a great example of what not to do because it almost has it with the good cop. Because what we do is the idea is to have here's the threat over here. And if you give me the information, I can protect you from this threat. That's really what the good cop, bad cop is. So because this person's a threat, I'm going to give everything to this good cop. But actually, what it does is when you have a bad cop in the environment, now there's a threat in the environment. So I'm just closed up completely. It doesn't matter if there's another sense of safety there. I'm still in threat defense mode. And there's another problem here that we forget exists, and it's misinformation. So you might get your confession, but you might get an inaccurate confession. And this is where false confessions happen. And if you put someone in a situation where cortisol is really, really high, and that's what happens when we use aggressive techniques. When we make them feel threatened, cortisol is running through the brain. Now, without getting too scientific, if I want to get information, so remember, the goal of the interview is to get information about what happened. It's not actually to get a confession, it's about accurate information. If I want to get information, you ask me the question, I have to reach into my memory, get the information, and pass it back. Now, the way that neurons work is neurons have a charge. So the brain is basically communication via electrical signals. So for me to go get that, neurons will pass a charge over to its neighbor to go get the information. There has to be enough cortisol for it to have a charge to pass on, but it has to recharge while it's waiting because, okay, I've got it. Now I need to pass it back to provide you the information. If there's too much cortisol in the brain, when we have too much stress, that neuron cannot recharge. Meaning I've got the information, can't get it out because that neuron can't recharge. So, when you've been in an argument and someone, say your wife, says, okay, give me an example when I did that. You know an example and you cannot think of one. And then you get in the shower after and you have all the best insults. You think of all the examples. You're like, why didn't I say this in the argument? And it's that tip of the tongue. It's right there. It's because I can't get the information back. That memory cannot be accurately recalled because cortisol was too high. When cortisol is down, I can get it back. This is where false confessions often occur because you're putting so much pressure on tell me ultimatums. They want to provide you with something just to make it stop. So they give you something, but it might not be accurate. And this is a situation we may unintentionally create when we are too aggressive. And if you have that good cop, bad cop, it's a perfect scenario for misinformation because I've got stress overwhelming me. But here's the good cop. I want to give you something. But I can't actually access my information accurately because there's too much cortisol. So you're creating this perfect situation for a false confession.
Crazy Mom says, I could listen to Dr. Morano speak all day.
I could probably speak all day, so be careful what you wish for.
I want to get into, with the time we have left, I want to get into the nonverbal cues that a lot of us key up on. And these are pretty much innate, right? We're kind of like born with these things, or does that change?
So there's two sides of nonverbals. You have the universal nonverbals, and then you have cultural dependent. So there are nonverbals that are universal across the board. So, for example, I talked earlier about self-soothing displays. So when we are in high stress, the nervous system is overactive. When we self-touch, when we rub our hands together, the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. We know that this is universal because we see it across cultures. And there have been studies done where you bring, and I don't know how this got through ethics, but they've brought pregnant women into the lab and they've stressed them out. And the fetuses touch their faces, they touch their face. So it is ingrained. They didn't learn that anywhere. So it's something that is with us naturally. And again, when we see the smile, oxytocin is released in the brain. That's not something you can consciously control. There are other behaviors like orientation behaviors. So when there's something that we like, we move towards it, orientate towards it. Something we dislike, we move away from it naturally. This is a nervous system response. This is universal. These things, when we see them across the board and we can see that they are driven by biology, that applies to everyone. But there are so many behaviors that are culturally dependent. For example, this putting my two fingers up like this is the peace sign. If I turn this around, to me, that's swearing. That's called flipping the bird in the UK, same as Australia. But in the US, it just means peace. And there was, I think it was Bill Clinton had gone to Australia and he threw up his fingers, but the other way around, thinking he was saying peace to everybody, but actually he was swearing at everybody because it was a cultural behavior. And
Right.
there are some cultures where, for example, nodding is yes, shaking your head means no. But for other cultures, it's the reverse. And my the CEO of our company, Chris Hadnagi, was telling me a really funny story about he was with an East Asian culture, and he was out on an expedition, and he said to the person that he was with, you know, let me know when you're hungry, because we'll head out. So there was a point a couple hours later, he said, are you hungry? And he shook his head. So he said, okay, no, let's just do a few more. And then a little bit later, he said, would you like anything to eat yet? So, okay. I kept going for hours. And then eventually he said, I'm starving. And then the person, I've been telling you for hours, I would like to eat something. And it was just a simple nonverbal misunderstanding. And there are a lot of displays that are very cultural dependent. For example, eye movement behaviors in a lot of cultures, especially African cultures, looking down when someone is speaking, say someone is telling you off, when you look down, it's a sign of respect. But for our culture, it is often a sign of disrespect. And if you're not aware of these little cultural behaviors, you can misinterpret them. When I teach nonverbals, because there are thousands of cultural displays, I try not to teach to recognize a lot of these cultural behaviors so much as I teach the universal ones. Because if you have a limited amount of time, that's going to be your most effective ones, because they're the ones that apply to everyone. And they're the ones that we don't often control, because cultural behaviors are about communication. So they are purposeful. You know, we're not born knowing that shaking the head means no or nodding means yes, but we are born naturally programmed to self-touch. So those are the ones that I tend to focus on and these are really, really useful. I'll just give an easy example. I talked about orientation. So when you're speaking to someone and you're orientating towards them, it shows that you are listening, you're engaged. This is a really important behavior for opposites to understand, because it's also about perception of empathy. So there were studies done looking at doctors who were giving a diagnosis to a patient, and they were facing the patient, but their body was orientated away. So my body's orientated over here, but I'm facing you. And they were perceived by both the patient and an observer as less empathetic. When their body was orientated towards the patient, they were perceived as more empathetic. So simple nonverbal, that was the only thing changed, affected perceptions of empathy. Who are we more likely to provide sensitive information to? Someone we perceive as empathetic, someone we perceive that has our best interest in mind, meaning empathy. So that small behavior has a significant interpersonal effect.
What about the feet? Because that's something like we kind of not control, right? I mean, we can control our eyes because people know about this stuff. We know eye contact is big in American culture, right? So we know that if I break eye contact, the detective's going to think I'm lying to him or
Yeah.
her, right? So, but the feet kind of tell a different story, don't they?
Yeah, I love lower body behaviors because when we are in an interview, we're thinking, okay, smile. So our facial expressions are very restricted by social convention, meaning I know in certain situations, if someone said something I don't like and you want to kind of scowl, you know that's probably not appropriate. So you no, you fake
Yeah.
smile.
My
So
face gives everything away when I do it.
mine does too. It's another language. A lot of people are very good at controlling facial expressions, but some people aren't because spontaneous and purposeful expressions actually have different motor neuron pathways, and not everybody can control them very well. But we do know this about the face. We know this about the upper body, the hands. A lot of us are aware that when we're doing this with our hands, we look nervous. We know that when we steeple, we look more confident. So we're thinking about these things. I've never heard anyone go, when he was interviewing me, I was really conscious of my feet. I was really making sure that my feet weren't telling him anything because it's just not naturally what you focus on. But think about it if I said to you, fire alarm's going off, there's a threat, run out the room, but you have to do it with your upper body first. Moving without moving your feet first is very difficult because naturally your feet are the first things that mobilize. And it's because if we're in a flight mode, when we want to get away from something, the blood will flow to the lower body. When we're in fight mode, the blood will flow to the upper body. So that's why you see people pump out their chest. And when we're in a threat, the feet will go because they're saying, okay, get me out of here. So if you've just asked a question that's hit a nerve, maybe they're still smiling, you see absolutely nothing on them. No, it doesn't mean anything to me. The nervous system has picked it up because say you've named the weapon and it's not been listed anywhere. They know it. They have this information. Their nervous system will react to it. The, the body is saying, get me out of here. But they're still looking composed. So often what the feet will do is it's preparing to mobilize you. They will turn towards the exit. And often, too, when we are uncomfortable, we try and make ourselves really small as if we're trying to disappear. It's like, I don't want to be in here. You can kind of imagine it as you have a string tied to all of your limbs. And the more uncomfortable someone gets, the more you're kind of pulling it in the middle and everything closes off. And what I found in my research was when someone was in discomfort, they would tend to bring their knees together. They would tend to tuck their feet under their chair, put their feet together, and everything gets smaller. And if I'm really conscious of what my body is doing, I'm less consciously aware of what my lower body is doing. Because think too, we have very limited cognitive capacity. So I can't think about every single thing at once because I'm also trying to think about what's my lie? What did I say before? What have I not said? What is going to catch me out? So there's already a lot going on, and my cognitive resources are already being very drained. So I'm focusing on this part, and behaviors slip out, and typically that's in the lower body.
Well, what about people like myself who talk with their hands a lot? Is that something that's good or bad, or well, what happens when I stop talking with my hands?
Well, there were studies done looking at when people are public speaking where we look the most, and actually it's the hands. And when we're in interviews, it's the face and the hands. We like when people talk with their hands. It's when people are very, very closed off, it makes them appear less confident. Now, if you're speaking with your hands and you have open palms like this rather than like this, it actually increases perceived trustworthiness because although we're a modern society, we're still running around with brains that were designed for, foraging in woods and eating berries. So although we're very advanced, our brains are still very ancient. And in those civilizations, if you can't see the hands, I might have a weapon. That's why we also don't like hands in pockets and hands behind the back because you can't see if I'm hiding anything. So naturally, if you're in a threat situation and there's open palms, it's perceived as less threatening. So when you are moving with your hands like this, it can naturally kind of calm someone down.
Pixie does says, I wish I knew her when I was going through my divorce. We'll have to talk about that, Pixie. And thanks for that super, Pixie. And thanks, Sinead, for the membership too. I didn't get a chance. The chat was going a little crazy before, and I wasn't able to communicate with everybody. Now, how about the paleness in the face? Like, is that like everything's fine, then all of a sudden the person just goes white on you?
Yeah, the ghosting. So that's an indication that someone's in a flight mode. Because think about it, if they're in fight mode, they're getting aggressive. Often you see their face go red. The face will go red with anger, and the upper body pumps out because this is where the blood's flowing. It's going to the biceps, it's going to the chest, it's going to the face. When I'm in flight mode, everything will go to the lower body. But you see people often go red in the face when they're nervous. So when I'm in flight mode a little bit, I can still blush in the face. But for me to go pale, there is a real movement of blood flow away from the upper body, meaning something has happened and that person wants to get out. So when you see that, that's an indication of, okay, they have just gone into flight mode. And now you use your questioning to figure out why.
Michelina has a question for you. Is micro body language with a question mark? Yes, the body face react 5 seconds before the brain, right? Is that something that you've found in your research?
It's actually the opposite. The brain, you can see the brain prepares to do something before it does, which is, without getting too philosophical, it brings up the question of, do we actually have any free will? Because you can see a decision made before the decision's made, because you can see the brain prepare for action before action is taken. And you can see the brain kind of prepare for decision before decision is made. So you can see it in the brain before you can see it in the body.
Barbara Jean says, Joe, we're Italians. If that's what we do, it means exactly what we're saying.
And this
Yeah,
is
so
why, sorry,
culture, right?
culture and baselining too. Because, for example, if you're naturally someone that talks with their hands, but you're also someone maybe that grabs your hands a lot, that might not be a sense of nervousness to you. You're someone that plays with your hair. Playing with our hair, say I do this a lot
Not
with
me.
my hair. Yeah, not you, but maybe you just play with your head. But a lot of people will play with the hair. But when you're nervous, this is something that you see increase, because anywhere that has nerve endings will send signals to the brain to calm down. So this is why we self-touch with the hands a lot, because the fingertips and the lips have a lot of nerve endings. So when I touch them, it sends a signal quicker to the brain to calm down. That's why when someone's nervous, they rarely kind of grab their thigh. It's very specific regions. When you pull on the hair follicles also have a lot of nerve endings. So the fingertips, like a lot of people bite their nails, bite their lip, and it's again because of the nerve endings. So when you see people tug at their hair, it can be that sense of nervousness. I know I have a tendency to kind of do this. And I do that often when I'm really stressed. But some people play with their hair naturally, and it has no indication of whether they're increasing in nervousness or not. So it's really important to see if that's a baseline behavior. Some people do this with their hands a lot, and it has no indication. So if they do that routinely when comfortable, then if you see it when you've asked a question, it might not be because of the discomfort. And if you see them do it in other situations, again, it might not be because of the discomfort. So it's important to understand what's a behavior that is common to you and what is a behavior that is unique from your baseline behaviors.
My buddy Mike, who's a retired detective, he says, I lied for a living. that's that's basically what it is. Just don't get caught, right? That's all.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
whole thing in the nutshell. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Abbie, this was actually fascinating. We could talk about this for 3 days for
Yeah.
sure. Tell the folks where they could find information about you, your website, and and some of the other things. I know you've written articles on serial killers and
Yeah.
counterterrorism, even cannibals, right?
Yeah, my research background is a little bit surprising. I have research papers on cannibalism, on serial killers. I actually worked on the world's largest data set that's ever been recorded of serial killers. There's some really interesting stuff there. I have papers on psychopathy, schizophrenia, on pedophilia, all sorts of dark psychology, and then also nonverbals and cooperation. So all of those papers, if you are interested in kind of the dark side, can be found on Google Scholar. But everything, including all the Google Scholar links, my blog, I also have a psychology podcast. I'm also starting a YouTube channel. So I do a lot of things, and all my speeches and my work with Wired can all be found on my website, which is just abbiemorano.com, which is ABBIEMARONO.com. And I'm very active on my Instagram, which is Dr. Abbie Official, and then LinkedIn, which is Dr. Abbie Morano.
And that Nightbot, just perfect timing, has your website nice and ready for everybody there. Dr. Abbie, this was phenomenal. I mean, charmed. Let's see, what is it? Charmed. Southern Charmed says, you hope you come back. I do too. Hopefully, we'll talk about something. You hang out for a second, Doctor. We're going to say goodbye to the audience. Guys, take care tomorrow night. Bob Mata from Defense Diaries will be on. Everyone, have a great day.